Hi,
Hey, how's it going?
how are you? It's all right.
Sorry, you were breaking up. What'd you say?
I said it's going all right. How are you?
Oh, pretty good.
Good, good. You're Ryan, huh?
Yep.
I go by Elbow Jason on GitHub. So
Okay, how's it going? I seen you.
it's going all right. I'm business partners with Rick Carlino as well. So
Okay,
uh,
cool. What do you guys
we
do?
we are a software consultancy. He uses Ruby and I use Python, and I'm trying to use Elixir professionally right now.
Nice. How's that going?
It's going well. I really like it a lot.
Yeah.
Just it's hard to convince people, like, hey,
Are you still there? Sorry, I was breaking up.
what? I'm like hearing a replay. Hold on. Oh, okay, I know what's going on. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry, I'm in here and I'm watching, and I just heard
Oh,
go through our intro, and I'm like, what is going on in my head right now? I'm losing
yeah.
my mind. Yeah, it's going all right. It's a little hard to convince people to use something as new as Elixir when there's battle tested stuff out there like Ruby and Python. But
Yeah.
you
I
know,
like,
yeah,
I
go
mean,
ahead.
I like what I've seen of Elixir. I haven't done much in it yet, but
Yeah, pretty cool.
uh,
So I had some questions actually. So I
yeah.
see you're using concurrent Ruby, and I haven't got into the source very much, especially for concurrent Ruby. But I see you use it for MRI. Uh,
Yeah,
Talk to
we're
me.
actually just using it for one thing right now.
Okay.
So internally, so it's just being used for. So now we have what's called the forking server on MRI, which is like where, it basically forks off a process,
Mhm.
a child process to um, handle reloading. So like when your code changes, it'll kill off the child process and fork off another one.
Okay.
So it makes like for really fast code reloading because then we can, we load everything up until your code, and then we fork and load your code in the child. And so the concurrent Ruby is using that to just keep what's called a read-write lock, so that once the parent notices the code has changed, it'll like
Right.
stop
Lock it. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm
lock it.
familiar with the read write lock for sure.
Yeah,
Uh, so when you say it loads all the code, is that under the assumption that the Volt framework isn't going to change, and that only the only thing that needs to change is like the stuff you've actually defined
yeah,
in your callback?
yeah. It
Okay.
assumes that. Yeah, and actually, truth be told, what I'd like to do long term is do like some granular listeners, like maybe look at like your gem file, like because you
Mhm.
can for development of gems, for example, you can specify a local path. So I'm thinking like maybe those would get loaded like after, or
I
it
see.
would have like an earlier fork because it's pretty cheap to fork on Linux and OS X because you have copy on write.
Right.
So for those you could do, have an early stage fork before it loads all of Volt, and then a late stage fork for your code, and
Cool.
depending on what's changed. So I don't know. It's one of those. There, it's interesting. Like it's a different strategy than like Rails has kind of the delete the class and try to load it again,
Yeah. Yeah.
which has some side effects and stuff like that. So I don't know. The problem is this doesn't work on JRuby, for example. So we'll have to figure out another strategy for that. But
Okay. It doesn't work on JRuby. Well,
JRuby doesn't have forking, as far as I
okay.
know. Um,
Yeah. I'm not an expert in Ruby, so it's
yeah.
for me, like, to be quite honest, I've done only really small projects with Ruby, and
Okay.
Rick is all about Ruby, and I'm not. It's not that I'm against Ruby, like.
Yeah.
So, as an outsider looking at the community, we've talked a lot about this. As an outsider looking at the Ruby community, there's like a stigma with Ruby that it's like slow, right?
Yeah, and it's funny it gets that right
Yeah,
because
yeah. So
it,
Rick's been showing me like
it actually beats, not to bash on
benchmarks.
Python, but it's faster than Python
Yeah,
in most cases. You know, you know
yeah.
what
No,
I mean?
I totally get it. He was showing
But,
me Event Machine, and Event Machine was like doing 30% more than Node, and I was kind of blown away. Where I was like, not that I think beating Node is like the industry standard or
yeah,
whatever,
but there's a
but
lot of people working on Node.
right,
Like Google
right.
put a lot into it, right? But yet, like it's funny actually. Like JRuby, like I've run JRuby in production, and it's much faster than MRI. Like you'll see two
Hmm.
to three times faster on MRI.
Okay.
And then they've got a project. Well, Oracle's funding a project called. Well, the compiler is called Truffle. It's actually sort of a compiler extensions
Okay.
on the JVM, and so like they're actually getting. I mean, it's not fully compatible with Ruby yet. They're still a work in progress, but they're seeing like a 5x to 10x speed up on stuff where they'll literally take this huge chunk of Ruby code and the optimizer can compile it down to like one machine instruction.
Wow. Yeah. O2.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because they're writing Ruby code that's very idiomatic Ruby, and they're getting Java speed, which is pretty cool. Amazing. So
right, yeah. I mean, that's we've been looking at, what was it, Crystal, right?
Yeah, Crystal's pretty cool too. But Crystal's doing static. Static type analysis, which
well, either way, like if you can write, even if it's not pure Ruby, if you can write something that even looks like Ruby or is 90% Ruby and get C speed out of it, like there's nothing you can't do.
Yeah, definitely. Crystal's cool too because it's entirely bootstrapped at this point, right? So like the compiler's written in Crystal and it's LLVM, but it's pretty neat.
I really it upsets me when I see cool things like that just don't have the support. Like
yeah, and it's hard too because I mean there's so many things I'd like to try.
Yeah,
but you can't you try to build stuff in that and you don't have the ecosystem yet, so it's like, it's hard to, you couldn't go build something like Volt in it at this point, right? Because it's too early and, I think the biggest thing, at least for me, for languages in the next 5 years too, is like, it's got to have a 2 JavaScript compiler that's good, right?
Right. So I'm actually working on that right now.
Oh, okay. For Python?
I saw for Elixir. I saw Opal and I was like, so Rick, the day Rick found Ruby, I have never seen him that excited, or found Ruby. The day Rick found Volt, I have never seen him that excited. Like, just cool. So you know, he was like, oh my gosh, he's like, I just typed hello, I just typed puts hello world and it showed up in my console. And I'm like, so he says this to me, he says it showed up in my console and I'm like, that's what puts does. And he was like, no. He's like, no, in the browser. And I was like, I don't understand what you're saying. And he was like, oh, just get on Google Hangouts right now. So he jumped on and he was like, look at this. He's like, I'm going to type this in here. He's like, it's going to come out in the browser. I'm like, awesome. I said, what is that? I said, what, is it just a trick? And he's like, no, this whole library just compiles stuff straight into JavaScript. And I was like, pretty impressive.
Yeah, but, it's cool too because Opal's a pretty good implementation of a transpiler,
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of sort of, we compile it with Mscripton and then it's 4 megabytes to download, and Mscripton's awesome, like don't get me wrong, but it's like not a practical solution,
Yeah, I get it.
So like Opal's pretty nice, and especially like the source map stuff is kind of still in the works, but they do have source maps and you can, do all this interesting stuff.
I don't want to do a source map. That'd be rough.
What do you mean?
For the Elixir stuff, I don't even know. I wouldn't want to even attempt it.
Yeah.
Not my. So I will do just about anything not to write JavaScript at this point.
Yeah. Is there for Elixir? Are you contributing to a project, or is there a new project you started?
It's in a private repo right now. I'm keeping it private because I would like to be the first one to come up with this. But the issue is this: the guy who came up with, not the guy who came up with Opal, one of the major contributors for Opal, his name is MEH.
Yeah.
I don't know his real name. That guy has some of the most amazing Elixir libraries out there.
Yeah.
Like and I don't. Not that I don't want to do this open source. I am doing it open source. It's just I prefer not to let people see me stumbling over the little things before I get it out the door. Like,
no, I understand. Are you compiling Beam? Are you writing like a Beam VM?
No, not at all. So Elixir has this awesome thing called well, not that it's an awesome thing. Elixir comes with its own AST parser, like in the standard library. So it's got this great feature called string to unquoted, which unquoted is the way you talk. Unquoted just means
like in a list, but
right. Yeah, string to quoted, not unquoted, but string to quoted gives you an AST, right? So what I've done is I just parse the AST and I get out this thing that has the structure of what a JavaScript function, a JavaScript object looks like. Where so what I'm ending up having to do is I'm writing the entire Elixir I am writing all of the functions. Okay, so let me stop myself right here. So in Elixir, there is little to no state unless you define it in a task, an agent, or some other process on the VM, right?
Yeah.
So everything other than those things in Elixir is just a function call. So I'm going through and I'm doing a one-to-one mapping between Elixir and JavaScript functions. That way, when I have to chain together Elixir functions, I can chain them together in JavaScript. I don't know how it's going to work out, though. I don't know if I'm too naive about this or if I'm. I don't know if it's going
the
to work
interesting
well.
thing will be processes, right?
Yeah.
You don't have coroutines, so
Yeah.
that's the thing that like gets Go has the same problems when there's like a Go VM and they do continuation passing, I think, which is really nice, but it's super slow.
Right. So yeah, as far as the whole like we're gonna do this in another process thing, I don't know how deep I want to. I don't know how deep I would like these things to go because. So there are other issues I've come across too, and that is and maybe you have too with Ruby. You can make DSLs like just I would like this macro to be a DSL, and now you have this whole DSL that's defined with macros, and I have yet to come up with a way to parse macros because they are difficult to. I haven't even attempted it yet. Let's put it like that.
You mean for you to parse it, like?
Yeah, for me to come up with for me to take the macro, make it into AST, and then make that into JavaScript, maybe outside of the scope of what I think I'm capable of right now, or
yeah,
or to even say this, like if in Elixir you can import things and all of the functions are now in that namespace as if you built that inside of that module. If you call one of those naked functions in the AST, it refers to that thing, but I'm not sure if I want to keep parsing forever. I'm not sure if I want to take every single module you refer to and make it into JavaScript because that might be outside of the scope. So I may have to make it like a front end calls the back end, does work on the back end, which is outside of what I wanted to do. But
yeah, it's definitely a ton of work. The Opal guys have been doing Opal for like 5 years now.
Oh, really? So
yeah.
One of the things I was talking to Rick about this actually in Ruby, I think one of the challenges with Opal, for me, one of the biggest challenges would be there are a million Ruby methods, right? Like there's just a ton. And that's not saying it's bad. I think it's incredible. You can just say, you can type English into this computer and out comes working code.
I don't think there's as many as you think, though. Like Opal's got the majority of them, and their runtime library is like 44K, which makes no sense. Like, so were you going to ask about byte size? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, so it comes down to like how big, not necessarily like how big the files are, but just to maintain all of those methods. I guess Ruby doesn't change, so you build it once and then it's good to go forever. But
yeah, I mean, there are minor changes between versions, but yeah, it's pretty stable at this point.
Cool.
Yeah, it's actually like that was one of my big concerns was like how big is all the standard library stuff, and a lot of it, like there are certain parts that aren't compiled, right? So like they don't do directory or file or socket,
right.
Like all that stuff doesn't really make sense on the client.
Mm-hmm.
But with what they have, which is fairly feature complete, it's like 44K compiled down for the actually that's the runtime, I guess. So I guess I take it back. So with the standard library, like we include, and the thing is in Ruby you require in most of the parts of the standard library, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it only compiles in the parts that you use.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So like, on an average Volt project, you're looking at, I forget what it is. It's actually surprisingly small though. Like, because I remember like I have an example Volt app I'm using, and it's like smaller than Ember with all the, just Ember by itself with all the Volt and Opal and whatever, and jQuery.
Not bad at all. I really like Volt, by the way. You've done a heck of a job.
Thanks. It's still a work in progress. But.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, it's a work in progress, but I look at it and I see like there are times. I don't know how long you've been developing. I haven't only been doing this for a few years, but I've found plenty of tools and said, oh, this looks useful. but we found Volt. Rick and I, when we found Volt, it was like we can build. And I know Rick told me you said not to say this, but we can build like real time apps. In like 15 seconds, we can have prototypes.
Yeah, well, and it was more just like I don't want Volt to get shoehorned into being the real time framework,
Right.
because like a lot of people don't need real time, right? So like
Right.
I feel like
Oh, I see. Right. Yeah. You don't want Volt to be like, oh, you don't need Volt. That's real time. Like.
yeah, exactly. Like you
Yeah.
don't like it doesn't. I don't want it to be like it's only for real time because people hear that. I think actually Meteor, that was one of Meteor's problems, was like I don't know if you see Meteor, it's similar on Node, but like
Yeah.
it's definitely like people think of it as a real time framework and that's it, you know.
Right.
And part of that is the way Meteor actually isn't as good as in my opinion as like Volt has more sort of things to help you with CRUD like buffers and you know, things like that. But yeah, so it's interesting. Like I feel like with the framework, you have to be careful how people talk about it. You know, like
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
to,
You don't ever hear the words Rails killer. Like don't try to go up against Rails.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's not that you would, but
Yeah.
I get it. It's something you just wouldn't want somebody to say.
Right. Well, and you want it to be like if that ever happens, right? It needs to happen organically. Like you don't want to pitch yourself as that. Right?
Yeah, totally. Like, did you hear about what this guy's saying about his own framework? Like,
Yeah. It's,
yeah. I have two cats, and they are like totally active right now. It's like they're like, you're talking to the computer, Jason. But, that's cool. Yeah, I was actually wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you a ton of questions, but Rick's like, don't bug him. Like, I'm
no, go for it. That's what the office hours are for. So
yeah. So your reactor. So my question is, you built that reactor?
so the word reactor is kind of typically used in evented I/O context, right? Reactive, right? Like we have like our own little reactive.
Yes, that's what I mean. Sorry.
A little different. No, it's okay.
So wait, what is the difference now? Is it semantical or?
No, so typically when you say reactor, a reactor means an event loop. It's like in an evented I/O framework usually. So like Event Machine or Node, they have a reactor that takes the incoming I/O and passes it off to your handlers and stuff.
Got it.
So Volt has a reactive, I don't know what you call it. Like we call it, what do we call it now? I can't think of it. Like we basically have classes that help manage keeping track of reactive state. So like, I guess a good way to explain it is
Task queue. Is that what was it? I think I wrote a test for something like live query.
Oh yeah, live queries. That's so the idea is basically like I want to know, like I have a function call or a method call, right? And when I access some data in that call, I want it to later tell me when that data changes, right? So that I can run the call again and get the new data.
Okay.
And so the way we do that, it's similar to, we're kind of borrowing pieces from other frameworks. But
that's fine. That's how we do it.
we basically, we have this .watch method that you can call on a proc, which is just a function in Ruby. And basically it will, before it runs the function, it'll run it once, but before it does, it'll set up sort of this higher up in the scope object that sort of at the global level, that is the current computation, we call it. And so as that code runs, it's going to say, anytime you access the data, you can say that computation depends on this particular part of data.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Yeah,
yeah, and then later when
you're talking about like building a tree that looks at just a watch tree or something like that.
Yeah, I mean it's a little different because it's not actually a tree structure. It's just a mapping between we call them dependencies and computations. So like the computation runs, and then everything that got accessed while the computation was running gets tracked to say, okay, these are all the dependencies And then
Okay.
whenever models, for example, update the data, they go and they tell the computations, hey, here's for this particular piece of data, here's all the watching computations. Let's tell them to run it or trigger a change event.
Okay. So you said it's not a tree. Is that because is it just a linear thing? Your
Yeah,
dependencies are all
it's
linear?
just a mapping between computations and dependencies, right? So like a computation has many dependencies and dependencies have many computations.
Oh, all right. I see. Wow. Okay, so it's not a tree. It's a many to many.
Yeah, but it's usually pretty simple. It's usually just, whoever read the data in the first run has a dependency on it.
I see. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So and then it's pretty simple actually. It's similar. Like Meteor does the same style. There's a couple other Knockout did it the same kind of way. But the nice thing is, if you're using our models and our bindings, the bindings automatically watch, and then the models automatically trigger the dependencies. So under the hood, like it's kind of neat because you get this like transparent.
Right. Yeah. You don't have to do it. So yeah, that's the other thing too. We were looking at Volt and it was like, how many lines of code did you have to type to get what you wanted done? And it was like one line. Just type what you want in a method. And that's it. So.
Yeah, I think the hardest part's actually going to be, it's a little bit like I like people kind of have this. They don't, understandably so, they don't like magic, right? They want to know what's going on, and so it's hard because like I feel like a little bit of magic can be nice because you don't have to think about it. You don't have to be explicit and manage. Like it would be so much more code, right?
Right.
But then the challenge we're going to have is explaining it, right? Because it's not that complicated, but I still haven't come up with like the 2-second like say something and get everyone to understand it.
I think you might want to draw a picture.
Yeah, I think that would help. Actually,
it helped. Just having a picture with arrows on it that says this guy depends on this, or have an arrow that goes this way and says this changes data and this one updates data, or because I mean what you described to me just now actually makes perfect sense. Like you build a mesh of interactive things that depend upon each other. The only question I have would be how do you keep it from doing circular updates?
So it's only a dependency points to a computation and a computation points to a dependency. Okay. But the only thing you're basically telling a dependency that the data it was using changed, and then that's just going to go and validate all of the computations, and then that's basically it. Like that's the extent of it.
Oh, I see. So you just say this changed. Go check it.
Go tell all the computations to start over. So
I see. Okay. All right. I gotcha. Not bad. Not bad. Yeah, a picture would totally help with that then.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
See if we can get Rick to do it. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, his screencast was really good.
Dude, he is the most productive person I have ever known. It's
really?
Yeah, it's really scary to try to keep up with him. Like, he'll be like giving me he gives me tasks all day. I'm like, Rick, I'm trying to work on other things, and he's like, just get this done. I'm like, okay, all right, I'll get it done. And then he's like, this is what I did, and it's like 10 times what he gave me. I'm like, oh my gosh, my gosh. But he's my hero. So
yeah, it's definitely like I've been trying to do some of the screencasts and
yeah.
My thing. Like I can do it, but
I liked your 10-minute what was it? Was it a to-do app? I think it was a to-do app.
Yeah,
it was great. It was a great. I think that was a great introduction to Volt.
Yeah, that's good. I don't know. I mean, his was so polished, though.
Yeah. You don't understand though. He's been working on it for like 4 or 5 days. So.
Oh yeah. That took a couple of days to do that one. So
and so I think he had help at his. He rented a co-working space, and I think they helped him out with it a little bit. But it's cool. Yeah, he's going through. So we run a consultancy together, and he's been in this content management course for the past few weeks, and he's like learning about how you'll see like really successful bloggers do their thing. He's like trying to do that. Am I off video?
It's just kind of coming and going a little bit.
Whatever. The camera turned off. But we've had some pretty good success with it so far. I just I don't know. Running a business is totally different than building software. I don't know. I don't know what I want to do yet.
Yeah. Are you
So,
guys what type of projects are you guys doing right now?
uh, right now, so he's in Chicago and I'm in Phoenix, which that may change and we may move into the same city eventually together again. But right now, I work for a cancer research company. I'm consulting with a cancer research company on a HIPAA compliant database that interacts with a bunch of their machinery. So
Cool.
it's all right. I think their demands are sometimes unreasonable, but I'm one of like three software people that they have around. So
Yeah.
you have managers that are like, I would like you to build this site, and it's got to do everything that Facebook does, and I want it in 3 days. You're like, yeah, okay, like, sorry, but that's not happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've freelanced quite a bit off
Yeah.
and on. Yeah, I definitely know how that goes. Well, one of the really funny ones we had one time was we were doing an app to like organize canvassing, so that like people could like for political stuff or something. So that like basically what they wanted was optimize the walking routes between all these addresses. Like thousands of addresses. And so I came back to them and I was like, this is called the traveling salesman problem. Because they kept complaining because we did like the approximation stuff, and they were like, it doesn't do, like, why did it send me down this road? That's not the best way to go, And we kind of sat them down and we're like, okay, there's this thing in computer science called the traveling salesman problem. It's going to be hard, which means it takes forever. We can't compute the best possible route.
Right.
They didn't believe us. They were just like, they didn't say it, but they were basically like, stop lying to us, like it was one of those like,
you should have pointed them at like the Wikipedia for NP hard.
They wouldn't have understood it, right? But It was one of those like, yeah, it was really funny because I think they were just, like, at one point they were like, we'll find somebody who can figure it out. Like, okay,
yeah, the people who figured it out is called Google, and
they only do 23 points because that's where it blows up. Like, there's not enough computing power in all of Google after that point,
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't like when people ask. So we had this issue. What was the issue we had? We built. I piggybacked on one of their databases, and this thing had like 8-level deep relationship in it. Like if I were to write a query from the top of this base object to all of its details, we're talking about an 8-level join. And they were like,
really?
It's taking 24 seconds. And I'm like, well, it's because you have millions of things in this, and you're doing an 8-level deep left side join. Like, you can't do that. Like, we're gonna have to come up with a different solution. Like, well, what should we do? And I'm like, there's a million solutions for this, but you can't have the data live. Like, there is no way to get this thing up here associated with all of these things down here,
right?
Other than through all of these relationships, because that's how this thing's been built. And they gave me basically the same explanation you said, where they were just like, yeah, somebody will figure it out. And I'm like, no, no.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, computational complexity is one of those. It's not intuitive for people, I think.
Yeah. Totally.
Well, and it's a little bit like they see, because there are things that seem like it'd be way harder, right? Like full text search across all the internet, but it's, it's weird not.
Yeah, that's easy to do. Like,
yeah, well, it's not easy, but it's
right.
It's doable, right?
It's doable, right? Totally doable. That's funny.
Yeah, it's funny.
Oh man, let's see. What else? I had other questions. Just gotta find the things I was looking at inside of Volt. Give me a minute. We're gonna talk more Volt here in a minute. Oh, okay. So your tasks, right? This is my question. So when I run, or when one creates a task where it's a background, so like this is my level of knowledge, nothing. So it runs in the background, but what I'm wondering is it a full OS thread that it runs in? Is it some sort of pool that you queue up?
So that's a good question. So I'm gonna do a thread pool right now. It actually sort of depends on which server you're running it in, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to do a thread pool for it,
Okay.
and maybe have some way to say like these tasks are, you know, they're not going to block the reactor
Right.
if
Right.
you're running in like thin with Event Machine or something, you know.
Right.
Uh,
Right. Totally.
yeah, but threads. It's funny because like threads aren't. It's really interesting, right? Because like threads have this bad rap of everyone's like threads are slow because Node and Event Machine are fast, right? But it's not actually the thread. It's the thread creation is expensive, but the thread switching is actually really fast nowadays.
Right. Right. Right.
So like thread pools actually get most of what you get otherwise. And then the other thing that's really slow is when you're selecting on a bunch of threads, right? So like under the hood, if you're not using like ePoll or one of the like the fancier OS level the newer select APIs, it's a like it's like an O in squared to watch all the selectors.
I see.
Or watch all the not selectors, sorry, all the file descriptors. And so it's one of those. That's being handled like we can all that stuff can get handled higher up, and then running your code in a thread is like not going to be a big deal, you know.
Right. Right. So you're talking about, and that's why you want to pool is basically because you don't have to.
Yeah, so you get around the creation costs. You can amortize the thread creation costs.
And I read, I think it was in response to Pencil Check, I think. You posted something about how Volt could handle a large number of connections as long as a bunch of them didn't depend on, like, weren't sitting on the same WebSocket broadcast or whatever. Like,
Yeah. So, I mean, basically, you know, they call it the C10K problem or whatever, where like nowadays it's easy. Like actually going back to like watching file descriptors, to be right, you couldn't. It was really hard to have a ton of open connections because of the way that select worked there's actually like a kernel method called select that watches file descriptors for data to be ready to be read or written to. And that used to be really slow when you had a bunch of connections. Well, they have these newer APIs like ePoll on Linux and KQ on OS X that are basically able to. It doesn't matter how many file descriptors you're watching; they're linear time. And so, you know, basically the nice thing is you can almost keep a connection open for free. Like having the connection open in modern OSs doesn't have a significant overhead.
Right.
I think I mentioned like I was doing social gaming for a while, and at one point we had literally 500,000 people on one Event Machine server. And admittedly there wasn't a ton of traffic going back and forth, but even when there was, it was like barely touching 10% CPU. You know,
cool.
The thing that's gonna be the limitation is bandwidth. You know, it's really easy to actually saturate for an evented server to saturate the bandwidth nowadays. So I think you'll have to be careful with that, like how you watch, how much data you're actually watching on. And one of the things I think we'll do to make that easier is have it where you can say, I want to load this data, I want to load this query, but don't bother updating me when it changes, because there's a lot of use cases for that. So that would save some. Because I think that's the thing that'll be the first like bottleneck is when you change some data that everyone's watching and it has to go out to everyone, right?
Right.
But sort of no matter what you're working with, if you're doing that, you're going to have a hard time, right?
Yeah, there are very few things that I can think of that wouldn't suffer from that being an issue, other than like a highly distributed system.
Yeah, and the other thing, I'm actually working on this today, is we're going to do a message bus. Like I'm working on that right now, actually. Like a message bus architecture so that you can have a whole bunch of servers, and then when data changes, it propagates internally and then goes out to the people who are listening correctly. So you won't have like this central bottleneck.
Nice. Is that DRuby?
No, so I'm using DRuby for one other thing right now, but no, I'm actually just writing. At the moment, I'm doing sort of a prototype and just from scratch with Socket stuff. But,
cool, that's awesome. I hope to see that.
Yeah, I think Sort of depends on how we want to go about it, but we'll see how far this gets us. And then there's some other cool. I'm trying to make it entirely decentralized, which is always tough.
Yeah, totally. So that's one of the reasons I started using Elixir actually. It's just some of the problems I was having. So Python, people are like, oh, Python's great. Python's fun. It's great. When you get into like distributed stuff, it's distributed stuff or concurrent stuff or even most event loops. It's just a total pain to do anything in them because it's feels like it's been thrown together. And I'm not saying this. I don't mean anything bad about the contributors or the authors, but it just feels like stuff's thrown together by monkeys. Like it's just like we had no thought when we were doing this. Just we're going to call it this, and you're going to use it this way, and there's going to be all these one-offs that you're going to have to learn about because it's Python still. So it's really upsetting to do that. So my boss was like, might need to move this into several different servers, and I'm like, there's no way. I built this thing in Flask, this app for them, and they're like, we want it to be on several different servers, and I'm like, there is no way for a Flask app to do that, and not right now. And I really don't want to have to roll my own homegrown, not open source thing for this because at that point, I'd never be able to use it again.
Right. Yeah.
But so that's when I started looking at Elixir, and I was like, let's do this. Like, this is easy.
It's definitely nice for concurrency stuff.
Make the VM do it. But,
yeah, exactly. And does Elixir, or I guess Erlang, they have it where you can just like connect up into like a cluster, and then it'll.
Yeah, it's like idiot-proof clustering. Like you just hit like node connect, and then you give your node connect self, and that's the 3 words that'll do it. And then every server that is on that connection or in that node can see each other at that point. It's got issues that I don't know. Like I've been looking at the security for it, and it has some issues. Like you can make the cookie to get onto the network like the number 1, and just have everybody use the number 1 to connect. Yeah, and it's really kind of scary. And I don't know if there's any encryption between the nodes.
Yeah.
Right? So it ends up being one of those things where like, yeah, this is cool, we're all connected, but the first time you send a credit card number down the wrong port or a patient name down the wrong port, like we're all going to jail.
Is that how HIPAA compliance is?
No, it's not that bad. So you can what's funny is people talk about how hard it is to be HIPAA compliant, and then you read the HIPAA stuff, and it just says you have to reasonably protect your data, right? And that's all the wording it says is like reasonably protect. It doesn't say encrypt. It doesn't say. It doesn't give any specifics. It just says reasonably protect.
Yeah, that's funny.
The issue you get into is with like small companies like this one is. So I'm not a security expert, but I do know that there are things you do and do not do to protect data, and people will suggest things all the time. And it's like if you didn't have someone there to just say no, that's a terrible idea.
Right.
They would implement these things, and they're like, but we're behind a firewall, and I'm like, well, so is everybody else in the world. Like, right.
Firewall doesn't help you with when they're accessing your site, right?
Right, exactly. I'm like, the firewall. We're through the firewall. If you're seeing the server, you're through the firewall.
Yeah.
But, they they didn't. It's just not in people's minds. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Yeah.
We want. Like I think. One of the things we were doing, and this is appalling, but I'll tell you, was we were sharing messages between 2 of the machines via files, right? So it happened before I got in there, and when I saw it, I started laughing, and they were like, we're going to put PHI in these, and I'm like, no, you're not. Like the server, they're like, it's protected, it's password protected. I'm like, this server is it's a Samba server, right? Like Samba.
Yeah.
I looked up Samba server, and there's a hacker library from Ruby called I can't remember the name of it.
Metasploit, probably.
Yeah, Metasploit, right. I looked up the word Samba on Metasploit. It's like 1,500 exploits for a server. I'm like, no, we're not using that. Like, sorry, no PHI can ever touch that thing. So
yeah,
PHI is fun to play around with. It's a little scary when you realize like if something happens as a consultant, if something happens, that company will turn it against you.
Right. Yeah.
And that's always really kind of scary, where it's like,
Yeah. Make sure
they're
you
gonna try
have umbrella insurance. Right?
to offset the blame, right? So I had to. So when I started with them, I was a private guy, and now I work under Data Melon, which means that they'll just sue Rick and I, which is great.
Yeah.
No, but I already told them, like, they were trying to go forward with something that I recommended against, and I told
Yeah.
them that if we were going to go through with it, I wanted like a statement.
Indemnity.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I want you guys to sign this and say that you're never going to come after me for this because I told you so.
Yeah.
They wouldn't do it. So
That's
it's fun though. It's fun.
It's funny. My brother actually worked with a really, I won't mention the name, but like a really big hospital organization.
Mm-hmm.
And they were doing some stuff with HIPAA data, and like he was like, "What do we have to do to be HIPAA compliant?" And they were literally just like, "Don't worry about it. We have the best lawyers in the business."
Holy shit!
I know.
Oh my gosh, dude! That's one thing I really hate about business in America is like,
yeah.
Listen, when we get in trouble for it, we're going to make more money from not doing this than it's going to cost us for breaking the law.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is how nuclear waste ends up in the water, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Totally.
Anyway, I thought that was pretty funny.
It is funny.
Well, no, it's
yeah, it's a little funny as in that's funny when it's not happening.
I have no illusions that my data is private. Let's put
that. Yeah, like it's quite scary sometimes. You look around and see what's happening. Let's see what else can I find that I have questions about. I asked you this a while ago, and you were like, "I'm on it." And I was like, "Okay, I'll just leave them alone."
Oh yeah, and I'm sure I didn't get to it.
The database thing for integrating databases. You said you want to make some sort of. Oh, okay. So I have two things actually. The database thing and that eJSON thing.
Okay.
For the dates.
So somebody did the eJSON thing.
Yeah.
I have to integrate it. I haven't done that yet.
Yeah. It was, what's his name? I don't remember his name.
Yeah, that was nice.
So just so you know, that idea when I was like, put it in integers, and you like explained it out. I got it from.
Oh yeah, sorry. Was that you? Yeah, I was arguing.
I looked at the Trello and I read it, and I came up with this idea. I was like, we can just we don't want to parse dates. We can just use numbers. And then he was like eJSON, and you linked it, and I looked at it, and it was exactly what I had come up with in my mind, except somebody already did it. I was like, I could have invented that.
The thing I wasn't thinking of, which should have been completely obvious, was they escape it if it looks like a normal. If it looks like
that would prevent exactly
because
if for some reason you ever use $date for your
which again you never would, but on the grand scale of things it'll happen at some point. So the database stuff, basically what I'm doing right now, I've been a little sidetracked the last couple of days, but I'm pulling out all of the Mongo stuff into a gem, and then basically there's a class that you can implement that has so there's sort of two levels to it. So one is I want to take my sort of server side ORM and wrap it up so I can access it on the client side, right? So something like in Ruby, there's a gem called SQL, which is like this wrapper, this sort of ORME query interface to all of the popular SQL databases. So that's sort of like level one is you can say like, okay, on the client side, the collections support, there's a where method, there's a limit, there's an offset, and then they take these types of arguments. And so you can pass those down and it'll make a query and return the data, and then it has a diff algorithm, so it knows like when the data changes, like run the query again and patch the changes up to the client side, right? But there's sort of, that's part one. I guess there's actually three levels. Part one is just every time you make a change to table X, rerun all the queries, which is not the greatest, right?
Definitely not good. Right.
So part two, I guess, is there are some data stores, Rethink has this, where you can actually tell me when this query changes, right?
Right. Yeah, it's like called dot changes, I think.
Yeah, change feeds or something. So for those, that's one way. The other way to do it is if you implement a parser, if you want to implement one of the query parsers, which there's a surprising number of libraries for things. Like there is a SQL query parsing library so that you can basically say, I'm changing this record, loop through all the listening queries and tell me which queries this document either was in before or is going to be in now.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So like basically just tell me if it matches this query.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can, if you implement that, it'll intelligently update the queries, right?
I see. Okay, so it'll pick them out of
right out of all the listening queries, right? And then there's a third level, which is out of the data we have on the client side. Some queries can be answered entirely based on the data you already have. And the only thing you need to know to do that, well, you need the query parser. And then the other thing that you need is a thing to tell you if one query is a subset of another query. So, I know it's a little confusing, but
yeah.
The point, I guess, is that like basically I want to make it so it's really easy to sort of implement this API at one of the 3 levels, and then you get data syncing and all
the
that
functionality stuff without having to code in.
Yeah.
Please watch this. Please watch this. Please.
Yeah.
Watch that.
So basically, it's really easy to wrap like an existing ORM, or not even an ORM, like an existing query, database interface library.
Mm-hmm.
The other, I guess, the one other part you need for sort of level 1 is you need a query normalizer. You don't technically need it, but there are a lot of queries that are the same, but you don't want to make it twice, right? You'd rather have it get normalized to the same thing.
I see.
So that's another sort of optional part.
That one sounds super challenging to me.
It's not that hard. A lot of times it's just, figure out what you can sort in the right order, and then to do it perfectly, it's hard, but you can sort of do partial implementations that save it most of the time.
It'll save a little bit of time on each one.
So anyway, so there's sort of like those 4 parts, I guess.
Okay.
And then, we can kind of start building for different, for the SQL side of things, and the, if
not bad.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but
how much time do you think you spend per week doing Volt?
That's a good question. So I'm actually only part-time, so I've got another project. I'm like, I work way too much.
Yeah, well, we all do.
Not really, but I like it. Yeah, so I don't know. I'd actually like to find a way to go full-time on Volt. I think that would obviously ramp things up quite a bit.
That would be really cool. So what we need to do is we need to hook a big fish. We need to hook a big fish.
Yeah, exactly. I've got a couple companies that are interested in like sponsorship, but it's not enough. I haven't put together enough possible funds to like make it worth quitting the contract that I do.
What do you work on professionally?
So I mean, I guess it's technically freelancing, but I've been on the same contract for like a year and something now, so so it doesn't feel like freelancing. And it's basically, without giving too many details, it's actually a photo backup solution for photographers. So the idea is that like we give you a drive that you can plug in with like Thunderbolt or something, and then you copy your files over to it, and then it uploads them to the cloud and replaces them with thumbnails, and then you can kind of restore and stuff. But the cool part is it's sort of, you can just treat it like this infinitely large drive, and it's nice because there's a lot of backup solutions, but they all require your computer to be on. So like if you're a professional photographer, you'll go shoot a terabyte in a weekend, and to upload that will take the entire week, right?
Right.
So like you don't want to have your computer on. So we have it where you can copy it, and then it's we're probably going to interface with like Lightroom and stuff like that. So it's definitely geared towards like professional photography.
I see. So you're talking about huge data sets that you're trying to keep them from
lots of uploading, just like constant uploading.
That's rough, man. That's rough.
Yeah, it's been a neat project. It's in Go, like the most of the drive stuff is. So.
Cool. Very cool.
Which is
the place I contract for has so much data that they're backing it up on tape.
Oh yeah.
It's I'm so thankful that I don't have to deal with this stuff. It's like they can push about 40 terabytes of data in about a week.
Yeah.
And it's all image data because they're doing. So the place I'm contracting for, the cancer research company I'm contracting for, takes images of cells with a microscope. They pass through the plane of focus for a cell, and then they rotate the cell and take pictures of it, and then they reconstruct it in 3D and do machine learning on the parts of it, and then they have a computer diagnose whether they think a cell is cancerous or not. Right?
That sounds pretty cool.
It's an insane, like, the concept is crazy, and it's really cool to see it happen. But I am so happy I don't have to deal with the image data. I deal with everything after it's been learned on.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like a little JSON, a little XML.
Right. Yeah.
But the guys who do this stuff are constantly like freaking out. And recently, we are switching over to Amazon Glacier.
Oh yeah, that's what we're using too.
Yeah, it's so we read about it and we were like, how much money will that save? And they're like, hundreds and hundreds of dollars per month. I'm like, okay, so let's try to do that.
Yeah,
it'll save. It's supposed to save time and money. Just putting things on a tape is also really scary because
you're not redundant, right?
Right. Yeah. Like, and what sucks is it's the gold of the company, right? Like that stuff is worth more than gold.
Right. Yeah.
Because you have all of this, you have this machine that just did a bunch of its machine learning on this stuff, and it's that's now your data set that you back up with the FDA, and you can say, look, we can reproduce this same exact machine state every time.
Yeah.
With stuff, but it's cool. That's really cool, man.
That's pretty awesome. My last startup actually was natural language processing stuff, but
cool.
Machine learning stuff. So I'm always super into.
What startup did you try?
So we were doing. This was back when Facebook had an API to pull down all the text you've written.
Okay.
So like people would basically like grant us access to their Facebook data. Mm-hmm. And then we figured out that there were all these linguistic clues for personality attributes.
Nice.
So we basically were. It was pretty awesome. Like we could take someone's Facebook data and predict their like Myers-Briggs scores, like, which is insane, right?
Yeah, that's hilarious.
So we took that, and then we could do like predictions, like political affiliations and age, and I mean age is explicit, but the implicit age is the predicted age is pretty useful too, and.
This person's 35, acts like they're 10.
Right, yeah, exactly. So we were doing all of that stuff, and then it was basically like a one-click dating site.
Nice.
Which is super hard market to get into, but it was kind of interesting. Like I think the interesting thing too is we had all this data from a couple viral products, so we actually trained the relationship model on the successful couples that we had like 100,000 successful couples in the training set, so it's kind of cool because it's like we're actually data-driven relationship building instead of like some psychologist thinks this is important,
right. We have data to back this up, like
So but it's super hard market to get into. We pivoted a couple of times, but nothing. It's one of those like you're kind of in the like personal data space, and that's so it was interesting.
I have friends right now that are trying to get bought by it's called Hiring Solved, and they do NLP off of LinkedIn.
I think I've heard of that one.
Hiring Solved.
Is it big?
It's about to be, hopefully. HiringSolved.com. They really smart guys. They live here in Phoenix.
They're scraping GitHub stuff.
Yeah. They scrape a ton of stuff. They actually got sued by LinkedIn tried to sue their founder. Personally, like criminally, and there were all sorts of. So I was talking with them. I was talking with the other co-founder of the company about like how surprising it was to get sued criminally, and how they like. LinkedIn took them to court, and he said if it had taken a month longer, they would have had to close the company because they couldn't afford the lawyers to fight.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I know, like we had a couple, like not anything that level, but like the patent troll stuff.
Yeah. We
But-
invented round buttons. Like, no,
Right.
no, get out of here.
Yeah, exactly. It is crazy. It's funny too. Like we had, the legal stuff kills me. Like we had several. Like after we pivoted, we were going into like doing. Or no, sorry, this was before we pivoted. So we had all these like licensing deals at one point, and like we literally had like 7 licensing deals in the pipeline, and they all came through at the same time. And then like every single one of those companies like came back at a later point and was like, our lawyers told us we can't ask for people's Facebook data. And it's like, and then the best thing is they'd always come back and be like, can you do it without the Facebook data? I'm like, no, it's not magic.
Yeah. You're like, sure I can. You just give them an empty array.
Yeah,
Here's your
yeah,
data.
exactly. Yeah, it's like what do you want me to hire a private eye? Like, what, like
That's hilarious.
yeah. So it's kind of funny because it's like they were very interested in our results, but didn't understand at all like how we got it.
Like, if you do this without Facebook, sure, we'll just go door to door. Like,
Right? Yeah, exactly.
that's awesome.
So, yeah. Anyway.
That's hilarious, man.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like data is like the new currency.
It is a little scary. So one of the things that Hiring Solved got into, he was telling me, was LinkedIn was trying to say that they owned the data on the site, and he's like, there's no way. He's like, the phone company doesn't. The phone company may own the phone book, but they don't own the data of the phone book. He's like, this is everybody's data. He's like, they can't own it. And what's even more hilarious is they weren't allowed to scrape LinkedIn anymore. So they started scraping the Google cached pages of LinkedIn, which is
people
hilarious
do that
to
for
me.
Craigslist too. It's kind of funny.
Absolutely. What's up, Jason A?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, how you doing?
Doing all right. What are you up to, Jason A? Nice name, by the way.
Oh, what's that? I'm sorry?
I said nice name, by the way. My name's Jason as well.
Ah, well, very cool. There's a lot of us floating around, it seems.
Yeah, totally.
Popular name back in the day, right?
Nothing like Ryan. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, in the Ruby community, there's like 1 million Ryans too. Is a funny thing.
Yeah, Rick said something about Ryan Bates today, and I thought he was talking about you because I wasn't paying attention. So I like called you out in the Gitter chat just now, and he was like, Ryan Bates. I'm like, oh, I feel foolish.
Yeah, that's her. I didn't even.
Well.
Yeah. Anyway.
Let's see. Let me see if I can come up with more Volt stuff to talk about here.
Jason A, did you have anything you were to chat about, or still there? That's it.
I'm sorry, my network has been flipping in and out here. I gotta address that.
No worries. It's always interesting. Like I think Gitter's done a pretty good job with their whole interface,
Yeah.
But it's always kind of funny because they have like this thing where I can message like everybody, but I have the feeling it doesn't actually send it to everybody. You know what I mean?
/all? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So like, I think that's supposed to be like the thing I can use to like as the admin to message everybody, but it doesn't seem to make any difference whether I use that or not. So
it shows up in text, so I doubt it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Who knows?
Anyway, kind of funny. Hey, Julian, how's it going? Oh, dropped it.
So you can do /me. That's, I don't know, /all.
Yeah, I think only I'm allowed to do it. I'll have to look. I'll have to look again.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
You can /lurk. That's hilarious. What does this even do? /lurk.
Well, that's worth trying out at least.
Oh, I think it makes it so I don't show up on the people on the side, but or maybe it makes it so I don't.
I think it's so you don't get notifications, like because in Chrome I could be wrong, but I think there's something to do with notifications, like where it pops up in the corner. You know?
Yeah, yeah. So, Ryan, say something in there real quick. In the channel, I want to see if it pops up.
Did it pop up?
No, it didn't. That's pretty cool. So it's how you, can you see that I read it? The,
Let's see. No, it doesn't show that.
very cool.
No, I don't think I can.
That's awesome, actually. So lurk means you can read people's messages without letting them see it. So you can be like, I'm AFK. Like, you're not AFK.
Yeah. I know. I do that. I do that sometimes. I'll be like, I just need to get something done, but I can't help myself but from reading the messages. You know.
Totally, totally. Yeah, that's I completely understand.
Yeah.
It's like putting headphones on so nobody talks to you.
Right.
And not listening to anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
I know. I'm always surprised. I mean, I work from home, but the big open offices are so popular now, and it's just like, how do people get anything done? You know, when people are constantly talking around you. You know.
Totally. I have that same exact problem actually, where I'll talk to anybody about anything at all times of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, not compatible with the ADD. I need some space to shut the door.
Totally.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
I think I got my network issues sorted out.
Cool. So Jason A, where are you from? What are you working on?
I live in the Twin Cities, so St. Paul, Minnesota,
Okay, cool.
and I am actually I work in medical simulation. I do development for medical simulation stuff, so a lot of data tracking, data analysis kind of logs. It's a pretty specific working environment. I'm not actually a professional programmer by trade,
Okay.
but I've got a strong background in it, so I work on it right now. I'm actually using Volt for an interface for a USB-based video server.
Oh, cool.
Video camera server for live streaming and capture.
Cool. Hopefully it's working.
Yeah, actually, thanks to you, I got all the some of the back end, the big ticket back end tasks running. It's launching multiple FFmpeg processes and closing them cleanly.
Nice.
So it's a big step forward.
Cool. FFmpeg's pretty cool. Like all the stuff you can do with it.
Yeah, very impressive
If
toolkit.
you can remember the arguments.
Oh god, that was about a month worth of just bashing my head against the documentation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. One of the things I'm trying to do right now, or get done soon, is do like an Nginx sample config for Volt.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, the funny thing is though, I mean, I've always just kind of copied some other Nginx config, so I'm kind of going through the docs really for the first time. I've used it, but I've never actually read through the docs. And it's written by a Russian guy, and it's kind of got like that English isn't the first language, kind of thing. I could be wrong, but it's definitely a little hard to follow. So I'm kind of like, maybe I need to I don't know, is there a book out there, it's one of those the official docs aren't probably the best ones out there, So I mean they're not bad, but it's I don't know, keeping good docs is so hard,
I used to work for a Norwegian company, and it was the same problem. We called it Nor English.
Yeah, exactly.
Nor English.
Yeah. I think too, I've been working on the Volt docs and stuff. It's hard because you kind of forget what, it's almost easier for someone else to do it, because it's when you've written it, you don't realize what doesn't make sense, I don't know, so it's kind of interesting. Well, that's cool. So, what do you said it's coming out of a webcam, and you're transcoding it into something?
Yeah, it's pretty primitive right now. What I actually needed, the problem I really needed to solve was getting multiple feeds into one device without latency. So IP cameras left the picture very early because I couldn't get a high enough frame rate or high enough data rate.
Interesting.
out of them because I'm doing live capture.
Yeah.
And a lot of the IP cameras I had were MJPEG.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can't stream those at high frame rate. It just doesn't seem like it works.
Interesting. Yeah.
At least in real-time video, it was not keeping up with like the YUV or the uncompressed.
Yeah.
So I actually had to. The first challenge was to find a USB 3.0 device that could handle multiple webcams because 2.0 was not a high enough bit rate.
Oh yeah.
But once that happened, the FFmpeg with a couple webcams works flawlessly. Actually, and in Linux, since everything gets listed out as dev/video,
yeah,
it's pretty easy to pick up feeds as they plug and play in.
Cool.
And so that's what I needed. Basically, we were looking at buying a system like this for like 60 grand.
Oh man.
Yeah, and I just like they were trying to sell me this like, so what? I'm going to be locked into your platform.
Right.
Can't get my videos out.
For security stuff, or?
A lot of it for simulation is based on security, and I think that's been a major limitation because up until recently, the only market for live video has been security cameras, and there's all these encryption layers, and I don't need any of that.
Yeah.
So basically every commercial system right now kind of piggybacks on some sort of security system, mostly I think because they still use IP cameras.
Yeah,
and then they have these usually come with learning management systems that nobody uses.
Yeah.
And you can't get your videos out. So if you want to download them or something, it's very restrictive. You can get parts of it, but you can't get login. So you're paying a lot of money to get restricted access to information, and it was like, you know what, we can do this better. So yeah, the first trick was fathoming FFmpeg and getting it to figuring out what command strings I needed to issue.
Yeah.
And then from there, the interface is basically just rebuilding those command strings. But Volt was attractive because of the reactivity, and then I can put the server wherever I want, and access it with a phone or something and hit start.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, the reactive framework seems to be really a bonus for this one.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Somebody else did. I mean, totally unrelated, but I know somebody else had built like a remote control app for like some video player on. Like they basically wanted like to build their own sort of. I don't remember the details. Like some sort of media center type thing, and they did you brought up on your phone like the remote app, and then it would trigger the video to play and whatever. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's the concept I'm using. I'm having to start and stop the recordings, which you basically have to use Control-C for.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
If you're running multiple FFmpeg processes concurrently, you have to send it in SIG-init, otherwise it will only stop the first process in the queue.
Oh, yeah.
So that was an adventure this afternoon. It ended up with me having to find the original proc ID that I issued.
Yeah.
And that was for SH. So I had to add one to it to start getting the FFmpeg commands, and then loop over the devices in the video string to close them individually.
Yeah.
But it worked, and it's clean, and it doesn't bring the server down with it.
That's always good, yeah. Yeah, there's a couple libraries, like there's that popen4, I think. There's a couple popen libraries that let you like start a process and then it gives you like a object that you can send signals to and read the standard in, standard out, and stuff like that from.
Yeah, I used popen, and more just because I was brand new, and I was like, well, 3, 4, 7, I'll just stick with the original, see if it works.
Yeah, I don't know what the differences are. I know 4 has like a few more things that. Yeah, it's funny.
It seems like threading is becoming a bigger deal. I know, like having been, I use Python 3.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people just furious over how. Python 3 changed some of its internal like threading methods and those.
what they do. I don't know enough about it.
Yeah, I don't know exactly either, but the most obvious example I know is WebSockets. Python 3 rolled over to WebSockets, so certain types of web apps written in Python 2 no longer work because the protocols all changed.
Oh yeah, it's been a huge issue for years with Python.
Oh, it's years. I'm new to the game. So
oh yeah, no, it's been like so they changed that happened like 8 years ago.
Oh God.
Yeah, it's so what you're talking about almost not that it split the Python community like in half. Where I have friends that do 3 and I do 2.7, and there are times where you just can't get libraries to work in 3 that were built in 2.7, and now things are coming out in 3 that don't work in 2.7. It used to be that 3 was bad and 2.7 was the bomb, and now it's now you have interop problems inside of a language, which so the controversy for what changed between 2.0 and 3, it's been a battle for years, but it is a real thing. Like there's no way around it. You know?
Yeah, that's interesting. I did a bunch of Python like 20 years ago, a long time ago, and then I didn't do much, and then I kind of got back into it when I was doing the machine learning stuff. But all that's on 2.7. Like none of it ran on 3. You know, I didn't even. Like it's funny. Like when I first got back into it, I didn't even realize 3 was out.
Yeah, makes sense.
Talks about it, like in that particular, the machine learning space,
Totally.
Yeah.
And then I remember reading up on the divide kind of.
I had a hell of a time with that split. I'm working on an inventory server using Redis. And I'm trying to get an object model, something like Walrus or STDNet, in, and they will not work in Python 3. The models will not communicate correctly.
What did they change? I mean, I know print and stuff like that, but what are the big other changes? I guess.
Strings are now all in Unicode, I think.
Okay.
Is that correct?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Hold on. We're gonna look this up because that's actually a really good question about what.
And I know, at least with the stuff that I was working on with Redis, the string conversion thing was causing me fits because Redis works in bytes and Python 3 works in one, and then Python 2 sends it out in another. So the ones that we're expecting a Python 2 string, some of them would just break if you couldn't get it exactly the way they expected.
Mm. Yeah, Unicode's definitely nice when everything's built for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So according to the actual Python.org thing, Guido van Rossum made the changes because he wanted to clean up Python, so he made non-backwards compatible changes, and let's see, drastically improved Unicode support, as well as Saner bytes / Unicode separation, print statement, the exec statement, integers using floor division, classes, alt-style classes are no longer a thing because, oh my gosh, why would you even... So I love Python sometimes, but there are times when I look at my code and I'm like, why do I have to say self everywhere?
Yeah.
Yes.
It should just do it. Unless I specify something, it should just do it.
Yeah, that was actually coming from Ruby. I was like, make it implicit.
Yeah. Like, why do I have to pass you into every object you belong to?
Yeah.
But whatever. So what's crazy is those few little things, like he changed the way range works. He changed the way a few other seemingly little things work.
Yeah.
Apparently, it broke the entire language because this happened in 2008.
Yeah, I just read there was an interesting article on second system syndrome that I read and they were talking about like Python 3, PHP 7, and like Perl 6 or something. And they were like it was basically like all of these have failed in one way or another, but like they all took totally different strategies, you know. So it's kind of because the point of the article was like it's always like anytime you try to change, like there's not a perfect strategy to like make any moderately large changes, you know. And it was kind of funny because he's like, well, Perl 6 is technically coming out sometime, like it's like almost ready, you know. And he's like, it took them 20 years, but like they got everything they wanted, and like and then like I guess was it PHP maybe 6 or something, like they tried to do too much and then they gave up and just went to 7, which like skipped all these features, which is exactly what ECMAScript did too, right? Like they had ECMA 4, which had too many changes, and they gave up and did 5, which had no changes, you know. It's definitely like once your language is established, you're kind of stuck with it, you know.
Yeah, you better make it. That's the story.
I think that's actually like one of the things. Like I'm obviously biased. Like, I like Ruby a lot, but I think that's one of the things Ruby really has going for it is it didn't get popular for a while, so they like worked out a lot of the kinks. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Whereas like it's kind of funny because I see why people want to do this because they want like contributors and support, but like the thing to do now is like I have a language and it's a week old, like everybody come try it, and like you're just gonna end up stuck with
whatever it was.
Like yeah, exactly. Before you work out all the details. And, I don't know. Even with Volt, like there's things where I'm kind of like, we're gonna break some stuff because you know, like not ready to commit to, you know. But then I think like once we get to 1.0 or something, I'm kind of like, all right, I gotta, you know, have to keep it stable once we get to a certain point, you know. So, it's interesting when you're kind of like, well, this seems like a good idea, and then we started doing it, and it turns out it was a terrible idea, you know.
Totally. If anything, if you want to put a feature in, you have to realize that it has to be like a permanent feature, and I think that's the scary thing. Is like, if you build it and it's wrong, you're like, well, this thing kind of dies. Just don't use it anymore.
And languages are way worse for that than frameworks, I think.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
Definitely easier to a framework author. Even. Yeah, because languages, it's just like you get this weird thing where, at least with like frameworks, the framework can drop something and the people who use it can go do it. But in languages, you get these libraries that are built on those underlying features, and no one uses the feature itself, but the libraries do, and there's no way to fix it.
Right, like cascades down and kills every project that's ever built it. That's the story of Rust, the programming language.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! I started a meetup for Rust like 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is going to be awesome, and I was learning it, and I learned a lot about computer science. I'm not a computer science guy at all. Sorry. I'm not a computer science guy at all, but I had a computer science friend who was like, learn Rust, and I started learning Rust, and I started up a meetup, and we had like 4 meetings every, one per month, and then they were like, we're going to do 1.0 alpha, and I was like, 1.0 alpha, this is going to be awesome, they're going to stabilize everything, and because that's what they said they were going to do. They were just like, we're going to stabilize it, it's going to be awesome, and then they were like, 1.0 alpha came out, and then like 3 days later, they were like, yeah, standard I/O, it's gone. Like, standard I/O is gone, and we're going to call it old standard I/O, and then we're going to give you the new standard I/O, and it's going to have 3 things in it, and it's going to be read buffer and write buffer and one other thing. And I was just like, what is going? Like, I don't want to have to build a TCP server. I don't have to roll my own TCP server when I want TCP. Like, are you kidding me? Like, I don't know how to do. For one, I don't know how to do that. For 2, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah,
but
it's really weird right now, actually, because like all the hip languages are really low level, like Go and Rust, and I'm like, how many people are building systems level stuff? You know, like
right.
Like I feel like I mean, I get the appeal, but like I don't know, they're very like systems level languages are very verbose, you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, you tell people like this competes with C. Well, that's cool. You could do things that you can do in C, but the things that you want to do in C are the things that you wouldn't want to do in Ruby because either Ruby doesn't have the performance, and at that point you have to go into CLAN, right? Like you don't.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing is like if I don't have to do low level stuff, why would I?
Yeah, well, and I'm doing like
Yeah.
I'm doing Go development for my day job right now, and there are so many times where I'm like, if only I had, and admittedly, like Rust has a lot of this stuff, I think, but where I'm like, if I had map or reduce or
Mhm.
or exceptions, you know,
Yeah.
like there's so many, like it's just so verbose to do. Like I had one thing where I ported it, like I had a library I'd written in Ruby, and I was like, I'm gonna port this over, and it ended up being like 4 or 5 times as much code, you know.
Mhm.
And then like people at the Go meetups are like, it's so succinct, and I'm like, yeah, you're comparing that to C++ where you had to memory. Like, it's not succinct in my world, you know.
Right. Totally.
Like I don't know. I mean, there's some things I like about the language too. Like, it's awesome because it does everything just compiles to like a statically linked binary. So like you don't have like all of its dependencies are in it. You know, like you can just send that binary to another system and
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely the coolest part of Go is just there's a thing called NSQ. I don't know if you ever heard of NSQ.
Yeah.
NSQ was built by Bitly. It stands for Not Simple Queue, and it's a message passing system.
Yeah.
And you can go from 0 to up and running with like 10 commands and 4 minutes of time.
Yeah, it's definitely nice for system commands and stuff. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and it's there's no runtime. So that stuff's nice. Actually, Crystal's nice for that too. You get the exact same thing if you use Crystal. So, not that
I think
attraction, but
I have a bunch of friends that I have a bunch of Rust people, and they're like, "Go sucks for this, Go sucks for that." And I'm like, "Yeah, but at the same time, like, I could do it in, you could code it up in Go in a few minutes, and in Rust,
Well, I think the reason why Go is taking off is because there's a lot of people who need a systems language every once in a while, right?
Mhm.
So like they're not systems language people, but they need something to be in a systems level language. And Go is really easy to learn. It's not very powerful. As far as language features, it's not very powerful. But you don't care if you're only going to write 500 lines of Go code a year. You know,
Mhm.
like it's more about what can I do quickly and understand everything. You know, and so like I think that's where the appeal of Go is because it's like you really can pick up Go in a weekend, you know.
Yeah, 24 keywords or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's super simple. Like there's nothing that complicated in it, you know.
I do like the fact that they have one loop. Like, there's no mystery, and it's kind of surprising that other languages haven't done that same thing. Like, you don't need, not that you don't need a while loop, but
Right.
a while loop, if you just say the word for.
A while loop is like, like Ruby has the loop construct, which just repeats a block forever. Like loop and break is all you need to implement all the other ones, right?
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
You know? Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting too. Like in Ruby, everything's done through blocks, and man, you miss blocks when you're in other languages, because
Yeah.
like especially doing JavaScript stuff where you're like,
Oh.
it's a anonymous function, but I can't return from it, and I can't, like if I return from it, all I'm doing is returning the function itself, like it's cool because it lets you build, like blocks let you build real iterator, iterate, it's pretty cool. Like it's definitely one of those like little features that is a pretty big win, I think,
I just thought of another thing. The reason I can't port Elixir over to JavaScript easily.
Oh, tail recursion.
Tail recursion, yeah. Like, what am I gonna do? Like, this stack has a million functions on it. Like, just keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there are. So it's interesting, right? Because there's like Scala JS, which does Scala, and like it's the same thing. Like you have to trampoline. Like if you've ever seen trampolining.
No.
It's like this weird way of doing recursion without doing recursion when you're calling back and forth between multiple. Like there are a few times where like in a language like Scala where you have a like more strict type system, you can elide some of the tail stuff. Like you can move it into a for loop and stuff, but it can't do it when it's like I call this function and this function calls this function and then repeats. You know,
I see. Yeah. Like
Okay.
trampolining is like some weird technique to like get ClojureScript does the same thing too.
I'm gonna have to look that up then.
So you're kind of bouncing it around in a limited space.
I don't remember the details, but it's kind of one of those like, man, what a pain in the butt. Like all the JV functional languages do it because they are even. Yeah, I think Scala can do some of them, but they like, you know, like that's like I like the JVM a lot. Like for like the JRuby is pretty awesome, but like it's hard for functional languages because it's like they don't have scalar recursion on the JVM either, you know. So they have to do all these weird things, and I don't know, kind of interesting.
I'm gonna have to do weird things. So thinking about things like that is a little upsetting, just because, you know, I would like not to have to do that, but you know, like I have to roll my own solution for tail call optimization somehow.
Yeah, and you may not be able to. Like,
yeah.
Yes.
I think my best bet may be to just use I don't know, a while loop inside of the while loop with predefined arguments or something. Just a bunch of accumulators, things that act like accumulators.
Yeah. If it makes you feel any better, I think the ES6 spec says the browsers are supposed to support tail call.
Wait, tail call.
So like in 10 years, you'll be good.
I'll only have to wait a few years.
Yeah.
Wait forever.
What's really great, I mean, I'd love to see all these things make it in the language, but I'm laughing because like 2 years ago, I was talking to somebody and they're like, ES6 is like almost standardized. It'll be out the door like in the next month.
You're like, yeah, sure.
It's one of those like, never assume a committee is going to get stuff done quickly.
I'm a critic of JavaScript like crazy. And I was actually talking to Rick about this today. Undefined method. Undefined is not a function, or undefined is not.
You know that they have it in Java in Chrome now, where it'll tell you what function it was.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
so I'm doing all my testing.
How long did we have to wait for that? A feature that should have been in there?
20 years, man.
Like,
15 years.
I remember I was programming when JavaScript came out.
Yeah, I remember that.
Like, I remember being like, I don't get it. Like with prototypes.
Yeah, my opinion hasn't changed from then. I didn't get it back then, and I don't get it now.
Yeah, I mean, I get it now. My first job out of college was actually like a front-end developer in 2006, which was like no one was doing front-end development back then. So it was kind of fun actually, because that was like we were doing big JavaScript apps before Firebug came out.
Oh wow.
So like when Firebug came out, we were just like, my entire world has changed, you know? Like I can see what's going on.
I have tools.
Yeah. It was a fun time. It was a fun time to be a front-end developer. Yeah. And it was kind of like one of those, it's interesting, right? Because like we would just build everything. Like we took like the core language functions and then built everything out again, you know? Like we didn't use prototype inherit. Well, actually, this is probably boring, but like the company I worked for hired the guy who did MooTools, like right as MooTools was coming out. So like he sat at the desk next to me while he built MooTools, you know, and like so we were using that for a lot of stuff. But it was kind of funny because he did like a presentation after he'd been working on it for a couple months. And he demoed MooTools, and we're like, yeah, that's cool. And we were all like, what editor were you using? Because he was using TextMate, and like he had all the snippets set up and stuff. Yeah, and he just like demoed like what was one of the first like good JavaScript frameworks, you know. And we're like, yeah. Like, what was that editor, you know? It was kind of funny.
Oh man.
Yeah, it was interesting. But it's interesting because I think like, you know, especially now where the JavaScript community is all compiling to JavaScript, right? Like they're all doing the compilers. I think we're gonna just see like once you've already got that in your tool chain, there's really no benefit to not picking another compiler that's not JavaScript. You know what I mean? I guess maybe for the debugging a little bit, but I don't know. Debugging is getting pretty good on some of the transpilers. So
I was reading something, and I don't remember who wrote it or where I read it, but they were talking about how JavaScript in the future, they think that JavaScript will, you'll have people who code in JavaScript, and then you'll have everyone else who doesn't actually have to learn JavaScript anymore because it would just be a targeted compilation.
I really think that's how it's going to be. Like people,
Yeah.
I said it 5 years ago, and people kind of looked at me like I was crazy. But now everyone's kind of coming around to it. I think.
Yeah. I mean,
I think the big thing is like people are kind of hesitant about that because they're like, well, then I've got to understand all this stuff. I'm like, you don't understand assembly, but you write.
yeah.
Right? You know what I mean? Like it's not. It's tooling. Like the tooling is what makes it so you don't have to know the underlying. You know.
Right.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting. It'll take a little while, I think, but yeah, I think too. You know, JavaScript did pretty good as far as a language that appeals. Like everyone's kind of like, no one loves it, but not a lot of people hate it. You know what I mean?
I know a bunch of people who love it, but they're weirdos. So.
Yeah, but I
Better
think,
than ASP.
what'd you say?
Better than Microsoft Active Server.
Yeah. yeah. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes, but.
Totally.
I don't know. It's just really hard to build a big app in JavaScript. Not that Ruby's perfect, but it's definitely way easier. yeah.
Well, JavaScript, I think, serves its niche really well. But growing out of that niche, it doesn't have the things it needs to support other types of development, or it would need.
I think the biggest thing is writing asynchronous code everywhere is really hard.
Yeah.
And I don't think people realize it because so many people are coming into JavaScript and they've only done asynchronous programming. And when you do, like even in Volt right now we have promises, but I have a plan to get rid of those and make it work with synchronous programming. But when you've done synchronous programming and you go to asynchronous, you're like, where's my stack trace? Like, why can't I tell where this is coming from? Or even just it's just hard to keep it all in your head. And I think they're adding in ES7 they're adding async await, which I think will sort of maybe alleviate that. But it's weird, right? Because in Node, they got generators in Node a long time ago, and the Node community was just kind of like, we like callbacks, even if we can do synchronous, we don't want to do it,
Everybody's already using it, so why would we switch to generators?
Right, but synchronous code is so much easier to maintain and write and reason about, I don't know. I'm trying to do, one of the things I want to do with Volt is do an extension to Opal where we do something like async await and compile that down, so that you could write just synchronous code, have it look totally like synchronous code. And then what's cool is we can do the same thing on the MRI side with fibers, so that same thing, you write async await code and then it runs in a fiber on the back end and in a, as callbacks under the hood on the front end. So
fiber is the EM thing? Is that?
Fiber is like a coroutine.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Greenlets.
What's
Greenlets? Nothing. It's a Python thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I followed you.
Yeah.
Like green threads, kind of thing.
Yeah. That's what is it called? I think it's actually called G-Event.
Yeah.
G-Event.
It's the G-Event framework, I think. And
coroutines, man. They are. It's one of those. It's another one of those things where I was telling you earlier, Ryan. Python. Sometimes you just feel like some things are just thrown together by monkeys, and that's one of those things. Don't get me wrong. G-Event is a very useful library, but they have things in there that they have a method called monkey patch, where you just throw a module in there, and it will try to monkey patch the stuff so that it can be used asynchronously. It is just crazy. It's crazy.
It's like driving an old car.
Yeah.
You just don't know what part or where it's gonna blow
Yeah.
up.
You're like, something bad is gonna happen right here. Like, it's just gonna blow up in my face.
It's funny. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like considering that like some of these languages have been around for a while, I think Ruby and Python are doing pretty good. I think.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
But yeah, there's definitely a few rough corners. I don't know, like coming from like I was doing Java development for professional Java development, like when I was in college and stuff, and it was kind of like, man, there's just a bunch of things in the Java world where it's just like, come on, guys, like,
Yeah.
who came up with this 100-character method name?
Oh, I started doing Java when I started going to school way back, and
Yeah.
Java 1.2 was in beta or so around the time, so we were working in like 1.110, and even back then I'm like, I don't really understand anything, but some of this just doesn't seem to make sense at all.
Yeah.
What are they gonna do with? And I came back, like I got done with that class, and I hadn't looked at Java, and like 5 years later, I went back and looked at it. I'm like, I can't. This stuff I learned, you still have to do it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is nuts.
Yeah, I think we were talking earlier though about like second system syndrome, right? Like at least they didn't like try to totally change it and then fail,
That's true. That's true. It did stay pretty stable over its course.
Yeah, but it's definitely like I don't know. I think if you want to make a good language, you gotta like do it in secret, get all the kinks worked out, and then get it popular. Which actually might be nice because like Crystal is an interesting language and like has no traction yet, So like maybe they'll get all the kinks worked out and then it'll get popular or something.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
That would be totally awesome.
We'll see.
I read one of the things that I was reading it's on the Crystal homepage.
Yeah.
I was reading about one of their challenges was they were like, well, we could just do this. He's like, it wouldn't be like Ruby at that point, but who cares, right? And then all the other maintainers were like, no, we're going to do it like it's going to look like Ruby. Oh, we're not going to do it. And that's been like their montage or that's been their mantra for a while.
I mean, they've definitely changed a few. Well, like some of the things they have to change, right? Because it's like there's a compilation step, and then there's, but it's definitely like I think it'll be nice to have sort of the Ruby semantics. Like I think Ruby's got this kind of like this is how code should look and feel kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think Elixir kind of borrowed some too,
Yes, it's hilarious the amount of stuff you'll find in Elixir that matches exactly the stuff in Ruby.
Yeah, but I think like Ruby. So one of my friends who was learning Ruby recently, he's like, I just kind of guess, and that's usually what the method is.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
And that's impressive, you know what I mean? Because like a lot of languages, it's not. And like I think Matt's the guy who made Ruby did a really good job of naming stuff. You know what I mean?
Yes, totally.
Yeah, I agree.
Generally it's pretty straightforward.
Rick was showing me something that I can't remember what it was. He wanted to iterate over a range of characters, and it just figured it out for him.
You just called dot each on a string.
Yeah, and he was like, look at this magic, and he showed it to me. I was like, wow, I wonder what I'd have to do to make that work in Python.
I've done it by accident a few times.
I feel like just write it down and see if it works. Like,
yeah, the way like enumerable is set up is pretty clever. Like just the idea of the like a lot of language like it's borrowed from functional stuff, right? Like there are things that you can iterate on, and but it's funny like now working with Go again or working with Go, I'm like, oh, come on, I wish that there was. Why can't I iterate on this? Why is there no there's a bunch of things like that. It's interesting too because like I've been trying to learn some Haskell just to be cool, I guess. I don't know. but it's interesting because I'm like, this is a really interesting language. Like there's a lot of good ideas, but the learning curve is just like too steep for your average person, Like
Yeah.
for someone who doesn't have 6 months of their life straight to devote to it, you know.
I thought Wolfram was like that too. I had to work with that for a while. The data analysis, cool
Oh.
language. It was obtuse.
Yeah. Well, and Haskell's just a little bit. I think the thing with languages is the ones that take off seem to be the ones that have like a shallow learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
So like there are a lot of really cool languages that like it's like learn this and then you'll know it and you'll be good, but no one ever gets past that point, you know.
Yeah, it's a wall as opposed to a ramp.
Like I think that was one of the things I loved about Ruby when I saw it is like, you know, a day in I could feel like I could write it, you know, you know. And I've been like off and on goofing with Haskell for 6 months now, and obviously I'm getting older and slower, but but like I still am like I don't get what's going on here. I don't like it doesn't compile, you know.
I tried to mess with the front end language called Elm, which
It's
really
yeah,
similar
it's
to
like
Haskell.
an ML language, yeah.
Yeah, it was fun, but I had the same feeling as when I was trying to learn Haskell. Like, it was like, this is cool, but man, it's rough. It's just rough.
Yeah, you know the interesting thing with Elm too is that he's kind of backpedaling on it now, but for a while the guy was kind of like, I don't want it to interop with any browser constructs, so like he's like, don't touch the DOM. Here's our little thing to render stuff, you know. Like, and I like it was like, how do I do Bootstrap? And it's like, oh, you can't. You have to make your own.
Yeah.
Oh.
And like to me, it's definitely like he's definitely like a programmer who needed to build web apps but had never built one before, kind of thing. You know. And he did some really cool stuff, but like the fact that like you just can't throw out HTML and CSS and like expect people to adopt it, you know?
Yeah,
No.
totally. Yeah, I was looking at that too, where I was just like, I have to do what to get this to render? Like, I would just like these attributes to show up and and have it look this way. Like, no, you have to go back and put all the CSS in. Like,
you have to
I don't
write.
have time to rewrite all of the Sass that's been auto-generated.
Yeah, and it's not even like there's not even like even recently. Now he's sort of going back to HTML and CSS, but like a year or two ago, there wasn't even a thing that did styles. You know what I mean?
Really?
Like it was just like you can set style attributes, but there wasn't any sort of language, declarative language for styles. You know?
Wow.
Which
Jeez.
so it's one of those like cool, like this is a cool language, but you're sort of not meeting the needs of your average.
You're not helping me here.
Yeah.
Well, I can't put out. I could build a web app in it, right? But I can't have it look like it does.
Right.
It has to look like something not out of 1991. You know.
I mean, I don't know. Some people don't like this, but like I've got Volt just like comes with Bootstrap. You know.
Hey, it's like this. I don't like Bootstrap, so not that I don't like Bootstrap. Let me backpedal on that. There are other things I like more, but the fact you included Bootstrap saves me a lot of time from going, well, you know, what am I going to do here? I have no styling at all. Now let me go out and find this framework.
When you can get rid of it, right? But,
exactly.
But like part of it's like, I think for me, 90% of the projects I do, I'm going to want it.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at GitHub and look at the stars on Bootstrap,
it's 4 or 5 times more than any other project. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like it's like the one thing we've all decided nobody wants to, like no one has opinions about CSS frameworks. I mean, people do, but like not nearly as many people.
Right. I mean, I found one that I like more called Materialize CSS.
Oh yeah.
It's fun.
Did you do the Volt gem for that?
What's that?
Did you do the Volt gem for that?
No, I didn't even know you had a gem for that.
Somebody did one for it.
Materialize.
Maybe it was a different one.
CSS. That would be cool. That would be Volt Materialize. It looks like it is. We're gonna see if he puts it. Yes, it is. That's fantastic. I did not realize that. Let me put a star on user.
They even did the notices one. Like they like rewrote the notices stuff that Volt has to look like whatever.
The to the toasts. The notices like
the pop-ups on the top.
That's pretty cool. That's really cool. Thanks for pointing that out. I like that a lot. Now I really have no reason not to use Bolt. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Well, that's actually one of the problems I've been trying to figure out is I'd love to actually have like a couple official CSS frameworks,
hmm
but it's kind of like how do you make that happen? You know what I mean?
hmm
So like part of me thinks like we maybe make make Bootstrap the default, but then have like where there's a Volt materialized gem, and since one gem can override another one's templates, you could go in and change the templates to have the right classes and stuff. You know?
Whoa, that's
So that'd be nice.
That'd be slick.
yeah, that
for
would be
like
super cool.
authentication and notices and things like that. You know?
You may end up having to build like a separate app that you can just plug in the app to Volt. You know what I mean?
What do you mean?
So, not that I don't want you to have to rewrite your whole app, but what you're talking about is like extracting the CSS out of the attributes out of the HTML and like replacing them. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I was even just thinking like by default, like so Volt has like the Volt user templates, right, which has all the like authentication templates and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You can override that, but you can also make a gem that overrides it, right?
Okay.
So like you could have it spit out, use the same controller but spit out different HTML or whatever.
Oh, I see. I see what you're saying. Yeah,
So,
that's
like have the Volt, materialized gem include
right.
templates that make it
Plug
work.
it in and then it's in materialized. You don't have to go do a bunch of other stuff.
Right. Yeah.
That's a great idea actually. Ryan, you have pretty good ideas.
I'm stealing from all of them.
Whatever. That's what everybody does anyway.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. It's fun. Well,
I mean,
hopefully we can get some traction on Volt.
There are very few reasons to reinvent the wheel, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Well, it's interesting, right? Because like some people have been like, the question I always get on Volt is like, why didn't you make it work with Rails? And it's like Rails wasn't designed to do what I want to do.
You should just tell them because we're a Rails killer. No, I'm
yeah.
kidding.
Yeah. Exactly.
Terrible joke.
Yeah. But it's funny, like running code on the client and the server, like Rails never had that in mind,
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the things too. I'm looking at Elixir, and the most popular project on Elixir right now is Phoenix Framework, right? And Phoenix Framework.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it's nice. Don't get me wrong. Like it's got some pretty amazing things.
But
and
it kind of struck me as like a little bit better Rails, right? Like
yeah,
not,
No, you're exactly right. Like it is cloned. So Chris McCord, the guy who invented it, I'm not trying to knock him. He's a genius, and things he's done for it are totally amazing. But it is Rails with a few other features that don't exist in Rails.
Yeah.
It has the same structure. It has the same stuff, and I think it might be to let people who do Rails like move over to doing that stuff in Elixir easier.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm like, look, dude, like there are things that Rails does that you didn't have to do, and you're doing them. Like, it's like this. There are better ways to build frameworks than Rails, and I'm not saying that Rails that I know of those frameworks, but there are different ways to do things than Rails have done them.
Yeah.
Has done them, and he chose to do it exactly like Rails, and I'm like, eh.
It's hard, it's hard because, like, I mean, I kind of built, like, I've been working on Volt for a couple years, but I've been thinking about it for a long time.
Okay.
Like a lot of it was, like, I didn't start until Opal got good enough,
Right.
Like, but it's sort of interesting, reinventing paradigms is pretty hard because it's hard to, like, think of the big picture and then be like, how can we improve it,
Yeah.
Especially, I don't know, like web development's kind of in a weird state right now, And I think like I think no matter what, we're gonna start sharing a lot more code on both sides. But I could.
No, I don't think you're wrong. I think you're absolutely right. Like
EHH's talk was kind of interesting because I was like, it's like I feel like a lot of people think of single-page apps as just to make things load faster, and I don't think that's like the reasoning at all, Like I could, like maybe not, but like a lot of the apps I build, it's not like even if latency wasn't an issue, I still want I still want like controllers that update things. Like I want to just change my model and have it all reflected. I don't want to
Yeah.
think about the synchronization or like the
One of the things that upsets me the most with SPAs is I build a model and I build all this logic on the back end to check all this stuff. And then I build them. I do my front end and I build a model and I do a bunch of stuff to check it. And I'm like, I'm building a system that looks like a mirror of itself on
right.
each end, and it really is like there's so much code that's just duplicated.
Yeah.
So much logic that's just
Yuck.
duplicated, and it really upsets me. Where I'm just like, okay, I model this and I do this and I make it look like this JSON, and then over here I have it accept this JSON and I do this. And
right.
have
And
it
then
model it.
you got to build a REST API every time too.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that too.
Oh.
Yeah.
Like barf.
Yeah, there's definitely some low-hanging fruit in like the web framework space right now. But it's funny, like I don't know, like I think Volt's got a pretty good shot, but it's funny because Meteor isn't that popular, and it's sort of solving the same type of problems. So I don't know, like part of me makes me wonder, like I'm a freelancer and I like working like 1 or 2 person teams. Like maybe people in bigger teams just don't care about it, like they don't care about the duplication or something,
Right. You maybe actually that's a pretty interesting point. Like if I had somebody to do all my front end stuff and all I had to do was put JSON up, who cares, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
You'd think the employer would care because it's a waste of time. But
Yeah, that's true. But
That's never been true in my experience.
What'd you say?
None of my employers have been too concerned about wasting time.
Yeah. So that's interesting because then like part of me thinks that like if I'm gonna sell Volt like to people, I think like you almost have to take it back a step farther, right? Like the benefits will be that I can get one gem that does all of like you can encapsulate code for the client and the server and make assumptions that you couldn't make otherwise, right? Because like right now you can't build I want a button that I can click to upload an image and have it thumbnailed and then have it display the thumbnail, right? You can't build that as an entirely prepackaged set of code because there's no consistency between front-end frameworks and back-end frameworks, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So like maybe that'll be the selling point, I guess, is that like you could, like I think our component ecosystem could be the thing that like makes.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Right. So you could do that in Volt. You just write a little gem that you imported, and it does all of that. Now you have a button you click, and it does this functionality.
Right.
That's interesting.
I see the I'll apologize if I'm reading it in the wrong direction, but kind of the more state-based kind of artificial intelligence model being much more useful for modern problem solving. I've run into that in simulation. I ended up in Python because I was doing a lot of stochastic modeling.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a very useful paradigm for computer science, especially when you deal with interactivity. You don't want much of a linear chain. You want to be able to kind of selectively update and pass through and skip, because it's much better modeling of the users. And there are things that you want to provide that have really been limited to the server side because of responsiveness. I think Volt kind of fits in this mid layer extremely well. There isn't much to provide that experience on both sides.
Yeah. Well, and once we get where we have, I haven't done any of this yet, but like there are algorithms that we can use too to like, basically make every field a real-time editor if you want to do real-time, and to like handle conflicts between. So like, in Rails you'll have this last right wins problem where like I'll open a form, make a change, and someone else will open a form and make a change, and whoever saves it last overwrites the other changes,
Mm-hmm.
And so the way we're doing things, like it's kind of cool because I like the idea of here's one place to stick the state of your app, and like that's kind of, I think that'll pay off in the long run too. We'll see. I could be wrong.
No, that's cool though. Yeah, one place that I as the developer have to worry about state.
Right. Yeah, and then
Not
everything
everywhere
else is dependent is like coming off of that it's a function of that somehow. You know?
That's cool. That's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, we'll see. It's kind of funny. It's funny because like I tried to learn one of the Haskell frameworks, and like there was too much like, where's the state? And it's like it's always being passed forward, and it's like, okay, but how do I look at it? And it's like, well, it's coming into this function and going out of this function. It's like, but at any given point, I can't actually see the state. You know what I mean? So it's kind of interesting. Like it's interesting, like and they're doing that so that they don't technically have, state.
Yeah.
It's you, right?
Data in, transform it, data out.
Right. Yeah, but it's kind of weird because like you do need state in some sense, right? Like you don't want to manage it.
So does Haskell does Haskell not have state associated? Like you can't save state anyway in Haskell?
Not exactly.
There is a state monad, right? So like you can do it, but technically what it's doing is it's taking an object, and passing it into every function, and it's mutating it, or it's returning a new one, and that one becomes a state object.
Okay. Wow.
It's funky.
That's weird. So Elixir, the Erlang VM does that same thing, and when they say they copy data, it's interesting because they don't actually they don't actually copy it. The VM just manages references that happen to be in a certain order, and then if you change one of them, it branches that thing. So
and what I've seen in Erlang, it's definitely not, because the other thing that you have to think with Haskell is it's pure functions, right? So like there's no. Actually, is Erlang pure functions?
It is. Oh, well, I don't know what. So you're a computer science guy, so pure functions to you means something else.
Yeah, pure functions means that if you pass in the same arguments, you will always get the same return value. It doesn't depend on anything else.
I think Erlang is pure function.
Erlang is pure functional, other than if you're calling a process in which you save states, right? So you can save, not that you save the state. You have. In Erlang, you have these things called processes, right? And when you start up a new process, it gets its own stack and its own heap.
Right.
And inside of the OTP, which is the Erlang's standard, nearly standard library, you get these things called gen servers. And gen servers act like a server on the internet, except it's inside of the Erlang VM.
Right, yeah.
So if you give it something and you say, you have this function, this server, have this function to return this value to me, you can save state in one of those things. So it is always the same, except if you're interacting with one of those.
Okay.
So,
but you can like. So here's a question: like, if you query something from a database, you can just make a query to a database, right?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like in Haskell, it's a little more crazy because
really?
You have to have a global state database object that gets passed around to all of it.
No, yeah. So the Erlang VM comes with a thing called ports, which are once again just processes that get.
Yeah. So that's not technically pure functional. Okay. They're not pure functions because they're not entirely dependent on their arguments, right? Like if you query something, the database could have changed it, right?
Right. Totally.
So like a good way to think of it in Haskell is like if a function can be memorialized based on the arguments, then it's pure, right? It's interesting. It's really cool, and it makes it really hard to write applications.
Yeah, I can't imagine. So there are times where you're like, there have been times where I'm like, I'm writing Elixir, and I'm like, this is cool, and then I'm like, I can't keep track of this thing, and I don't want to put I don't want to have to put like some extra argument that just gets passed from function to function to function 400 times. Like, what do I do here?
What I'd like to see, and maybe Crystal will adopt this, is like immutable objects, where like you have some function call, like when you call a method on an object, it implicitly like returns a new version of the object and the results or whatever, like modification to the object gives you back a new object. Like you have to call it with a special call syntax or something,
Yeah, like
that would be
no
very
side
useful.
effects.
Yeah.
That would be really cool.
Anyway. Yeah, we'll see. That's a ways off. Trying to build something now.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I should probably go, but good chatting with you guys.
Yeah, it was
you too.
Pleasure, man. Post it up next time you're having one. I'll join in again.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to do more of them. So.
Yeah.
We'll see if we kind of came in and out, but hopefully we'll get some more.
We'll see if we can get Rick Carlino in here.
Yeah. Cool.
He's gonna be like, no, I got stuff to do. I'm like, no, you're coming in. All right, man. I'll see you later, Ryan.
Good chatting with you.
Take care.
Thanks. Take care.